Set phasers on. Stunning. Now, welcome to another Down the Rabbit Hole video, doing another Star Trek video. I'm going to talk about the phaser and what a weird thing this thing is. Now, when I was a kid, a friend of mine was very big into Star Trek, and I talked about that before, and I used to look at this and think, what a bizarre looking gun. Like, why does it look like this? Why is it designed like this? And when I talked about my rocky history with Star Trek over the years, I definitely drew a comparison with this and other science fiction weapons, thinking, well, this thing looks just dopey in comparison. Like, there's a lot of much better looking guns that have come out in other genres of science fiction. So I didn't really like the phaser for the longest time. Now I have since learned to really appreciate it, and it's a genius design now that I really think about it. And it's really got these awesome sort of 60s contours and design and aesthetic and fins and knurled and sort of pointy bits. Just love this thing now. What's interesting and what I always thought was very strange is the phaser actually comes in two pieces. What we're looking at here is actually the Art Asylum phaser toy. Came out many years ago. I think I might have got it for a Christmas present. It actually says Art Asylum along there. Don't know if you can make that out in the sheet. Just about. Anyway, yeah, that's what this is. There are lots of different phaser kits you can buy. There's even one that is a remote control for your TV. I find it's a little hokey because you got to kind of like move your hand around to change channels or increase the volume. So I didn't really want to get that one. And as I say, I think somebody got me this for a birthday present or a Christmas present. So that's sort of how it ended up in my collection. But now that I have a much better appreciation for Star Trek, I just really love this thing, and especially this Art Asylum one. Now, the big thing that's worth noting with the phaser, it's going to take a second, with this you can actually disconnect phaser 1 from phaser 2. I'll try and do it carefully here. There we go. Let me set phaser 2 down there. This is the phaser, and it was later designated, this is phaser 1, because... Well, I'll talk about phaser 2 and how the two combine later, but what a really neat idea. The fact that you've got this sort of transforming weapon where it takes two pieces. The phaser 1 in the show was kind of this very small device and yet incredibly powerful. In the episode Piece of the Action, Kirk talks to Oxmix, who takes away his equipment, one of which is just this phaser hanging on the belt. And Kirk says, be careful with that. If you're not too careful, you're going to blow out the side of the building. So we get an idea of the amount of damage that this thing alone can do, never mind that part as well. And even in Yesterday's Tomorrow, or Tomorrow's Yesterday, I always get that mixed up, Kirk is being interrogated by the 60s marshals, and they throw the things around, and Kirk is just like, if you're not careful with that, you're going to have a big problem. So you get the impression the phaser, just phaser 1, is incredibly powerful. Like, it has an immense capability. What's really neat with this Art Asylum unit, you can actually adjust these dials, and it does stuff. Like, it is a fully functional phaser. There, I just phased you. It has a couple of neat little features. Like, you can actually change the settings here. You can lock it so that it doesn't fire. You can have it on a very, very low setting, and then increasing all the way up to maximum setting if you want. Very, very cool. There's even a little rotating knob here, which brings up, I don't know if this is going to come out or not, but you see how there's like a little panel here? It actually raises that up. So now you've got this little, I don't know, I don't think they really knew what to call this in the making of this device. I think I've heard some people say it's like a little targeting device or something. I don't quite know, but it does something. It works. It has functionality. So that's pretty cool. Now, why was this the main weapon, and then why did they bring in phaser 2? I think there's been quite a few interviews with Gene Roddenberry over the years, and he's a very, very big humanitarian. he didn't want guns on the show. He didn't like the idea of pistol packing kind of heroes and stuff. And so he wanted to make a weapon that was more like a tool, and that's what this is sort of designed to do. There's a funny blooper, actually, of Shatner and Nimoy and the crew out on a shot, and they all pull out their phasers, and then they use them like electric razors, sort of shaving their faces, and that's funny because that is kind of what this thing looks like. I mean, I don't know if there were any electric razors this small back in the 60s, but that was where they were going with this, is to make this thing not appear like a gun. It was a little device, kind of like a remote control that we use nowadays. You know, you would use it for different purposes. Now, why did they then have Phaser 2? There are a couple of times it was established. Let me set this back in, because this is also very cool and functional. There were a couple of times where in the show they needed to establish, okay, Phaser 1 ain't going to cut it. Or I think in Return of the Archons, they decided they were going to actually just have these on their person to be concealed. It's a nice small thing you can put in a pocket. And then in other episodes, like especially Devil in the Dark, it was established that, okay, this one little phaser ain't really going to cut it against this creature. Let's arm them with Phaser 2 so that we've got more power, something you can really pack a punch. And that's hence why this thing existed. Now, I'll go into a little more detail, but let me show you. So, as specified, this thing, if I pull on this lever, it releases a lock, which allows me to pull out the Phaser 1, which is pretty cool. And I can slide it back in. There's a couple of pins there for a specific reason. This thing takes 3 watch batteries just in that little compartment there. Can you see it? Not sure. Anyway, and it was really cool. The light, like all the electronics are in here. This is essentially an empty shell. All the electronics are in here. There's a little soft padded thing you push there to fire. And there's a little recessed thing here that contacts with that. So when you place this into Phaser 2, let's do this carefully. I got to pull this little dial thing back, or slider back out. There we go. Then what happens is that little recessed thing up inside there now makes contact with this, so that if I press this button now, it's not coming out in the light here, but that allows the phaser light from here to actually reflect down and through the little front nozzle there. I'm going to try it again. Yeah, there you go. You've been phased. Very, very cool. There's some other functionality. You can actually put the safety on, which is kind of cool. So now I can't fire, now I can. And the other really cool feature, you can actually set this thing for an overload, which is from a few episodes. They would actually put the phaser into a state where it's going to cause a massive explosion. So if I turn this, and then I press the trigger, oh, hang on, take it off the safety, of course. Listen to this. Oh, hang on. Where's that buzz? Here we go. So that's pretty cool. That's a neat little feature. I think turning that dial pushes that little thing up inside the phaser 1 there. Yes, that's the phaser. Now, as far as like what this Art Asylum piece does, it's very, very cool. Like for just a sort of a cheap toy, this has got a lot of different functionality that is kind of accurate to the TV show. And it's really a lot of fun, like a great little device. Even this thing turns, and in some more expensive versions of the phaser, that actually causes the nozzle to kind of slide in and out. It's not doing it on this. This just rotates. But I've seen on like the, I don't know if it's the remote control or if it's the master replicas, but one of them, as you turn that, this thing will slide in and out, which I guess was another functionality of the original prop. Now, again, as a kid, I thought this looked dopey. I'm very much a fan of it now, but I really thought this was a dumb design. It doesn't look like a gun. And in fact, if we compare, the Enterprise here recently was on an expedition and managed to locate an artifact from a galaxy far, far away, and it's from a long time ago. This is a weapon of another science fiction series, and this you can tell is a gun. Like, this actually has all the trademarks of being an actual weapon. It looks, for a kid's sort of enjoyment of a series, or, you know, if you're an audience member, this says this is a gun, and it very, very clearly works. An interesting thing with this is that it's very messy. Like, it just fires lasers left, right, and center, and it's a complete chaotic mess, this thing. But that at least communicates to me, as a kid anyway, this is a gun. That's what you're using there to keep the bad guys at bay. This thing doesn't look like a gun. This looks like something else. And that was intentional. Gene Roddenberry had very specifically said, I don't want guns in this show. So when they had to come up with this to fulfill certain story purposes, they made it so that it was at least a little more functional. Looked a little bit more like a tool. Actually, it looks a lot like a glue gun. You know, it's got sort of the nozzle on the end. Let me put a safety on here. It's got, took it off. There we go. You know, if you can imagine like a stick of the meltable glue back there, it kind of has that look of something that you could apply and do some fixing, some repairs, that kind of stuff. In fact, Scotty even uses this to cut open a bulkhead. So it certainly was going for a utilitarian implement, a tool, something that is used when necessary, even though, as a weapon, this blows the pants off that other thing. Whereas the other one just fires lasers left, right, and center, and you better hope you hit your target. With this thing, now it's a conceit of the TV show. What it would do, as far as the special effects are concerned, whatever you're aiming this at, you would fire, and then the item would glow, and it would vanish. It was vaporized, disintegrated. That's pretty handy as far as making the TV show. If you've got a statue or a bad guy or anything, or a wall, you can basically have the beam hit it, and then the item in question vanishes. That makes this weapon, the phaser, very, very powerful and very, very frightening in comparison. This isn't messy. This is a surgical knife that will remove whatever your opponent or objective is in this situation. Luckily, it was often used for fairly tame things. Sulu used it to kind of, let me set it to the lowest setting here. He would use it to, do the heating up of the rocks to keep them all warm. Just try and get the thing so it's going to warm up. Spock used it once to chip off a rock for a sample. It's more considered like a tool or an implement. It's original design that Gene Roddenberry had in mind. But as a weapon, it's also incredibly frightening. You could crank this thing up, and you can just remove a person or a vehicle or a door, or as Kirk said in a piece of the action, the side of the building if necessary, with just Phaser 1. So that actually, to me, made this a really impressive prop for a TV show. Again, it's sort of a cheat that it basically just means you could eliminate or remove whatever was the problem in the show, and that makes this a formidable weapon. Luckily, the Federation is not a bunch of gun-toting people like Gene Roddenberry requested. It also meant when these get in the hands of the bad guys, which sometimes happened, that was a big problem. I think also it sort of served a purpose when in the hands of the bad guys, because although Phaser 1 is very impressive, it doesn't do much for a threat. And there were quite a few times enemies would manage to get a hold of these things, and they would hold people at bay, pointing something at them. I think this had to communicate to the audience, this is a bad thing, that this is being pointed at our heroes. So, or move away, or, hands up, or get away, or go through that door. Like, to have Phaser 2 look a little bit more like a gun was kind of necessary from a storytelling point of view. The Phaser 1 didn't really, it didn't impose much in the way of a threat, whereas Phaser 2, you're going to do whatever the guy says because this thing is super, super powerful, and it looks a bit more like a gun. It has a, being pointed at and action must take place because I'm pointing this at you type of a thing. So I think that was another element to the Phaser that eventually came through in the show. Anyway, I'm going to just call it there. So that is the Star Trek Original Series phaser. This particular one being from Art Asylum, but there's a lot of different ones. A very, very cool prop, toy, weapon, tool, implement, whatever the heck it is. I really like the functionality where you can remove this top piece and make it its own phaser and had different appearances in the shows. It's interesting how throughout the series, these did change a little bit. Sometimes they had a white handle on them. There are others that are all gray. This one's got the black handle. I think that was as the series progressed. Yeah, there are Star Trek experts who know more about that stuff than me. Also, what's kind of interesting is sometimes the crew would like strap on essentially a sort of brown holster to put their phaser on, and then later on it just sort of sat on the back of their... Eventually it was on a belt, but then sometimes it was just on the back of the shirt, like just tucked in. Even phaser 1, even phaser 2 would sometimes just be Velcro to the leg of the actor, and it's like, yeah, it just magically stays on them, and they did away with the holster idea. Very strange, but an interesting development in the history of this particular prop. All right, well, until next time, we'll see you down the rabbit hole.